He thinks we're what we look like on the outside. Good Southern ladies. Let me tell you something, though. There's nothing good about Southern ladies. Earlier this month, I finished the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. And unfortunately, this did not work for me. Coming into this, I was kind of excited because the premise of this book seemed very cool. The idea of a bunch of Southern elegant women killing hordes of vampires is kind of what I thought coming into this. Or even a book club, just gathering together to kill one vampire seemed very good to me. Like, that premise seemed very interesting. But unfortunately, it just doesn't really work. There are parts of this book I really appreciate. I think it's well written. I think Grady Hendrix is talented. But this is not the kind of horror I necessarily enjoy when reading. And let me just say, like, if you like this book, no problem. We just have a difference of opinion. So first of all, I'm going to start with what I like and then get into what I didn't like. I do think that the way Grady Hendrix talks about the, I would say, dull nature of being a housewife was incredible. I did not grow up in a house where my mom was like a housewife. She owned her own business. Both my parents worked. You know, they made good money. My mom didn't retire until she was like in her 50s. You know what I mean? Like, just wasn't the way it was. I'm also Northerner. I'm a Pennsylvania resident, so I'm just not a Southerner. But reading about this and knowing some of my friends who had like their moms at home, this just like the way that they are treated, the way they're thought about by their husbands, the way they think about themselves, the way that they have certain places in society was very well written. I think there's a lot of very good social commentary that Grady Hendrix is digging at here. I feel like if you grew up in the South and you grew up in this kind of environment where it's like a kind of nice, wealthy, white neighborhood, you'll feel a lot of that. There's also some stuff Grady Hendrix gets into about race. Not a lot of it, but again, this is the South. This is, in a place in a time where black people were still maybe not as equal as white people, I guess you might want to say. And there's things happening to the black population, and it's being taken for granted, it's being ignored. And that's very much true historically, where certain groups of people go wandering into black neighborhoods, serial killers, or, kids are disappearing for X, Y, Z reason, whatever. And it's not taken seriously because of their skin color, because they are the lesser dead compared to, a white girl or something. All based in, like, real historical fact, things you can look up, all very true. And the way Hendrix approaches that, to me, is very well written. Because it's not the focus of the novel, but it's there, and I think that in itself is very good. I really do like when horror is used as a vessel for talking about other things. I think that's when horror really shines as a genre, is when it's not just about blood and murder, but it's also like a metaphor for motherhood or childbirth or, whatever, what have you. And I think Grady Hendrix does that extremely well. The writing is also pretty solid. He really gets the voice of all these Southern women hanging out and their husbands. I think that part is very, very real and very well done. And I will say that I like this take on a vampire. It's not necessarily the traditional gonna burst into like fire when it walks out in the sun vampire, but it's a much more subtle creature, one that is more of a parasite on an entire community than just a bloodsucker and an outsider, and I really like that too. What I don't necessarily like about this is how much it's just focused on like the non-horror aspects. When I read a horror novel, I want there to be that like thematic focus. I want there to be that this is actually a novel about, motherhood or, being black or being a child or whatever have you. But I feel like Grady Hendrix focused too much on the daily routine of the Southern women here, especially one character. And again, the premise here feels like it should be a focus on a group of women. And while at first it's kind of that, it very much focuses on one character who is like the main character. And while I think she's a good character, because of that major focus on her, I feel like none of these other women really ever develop a serious personality besides like one or two. And the rest of them are just kind of there. And I also just don't think the character writing is like super noteworthy, unfortunately. This is not like a Stephen King level novel where you're going to be like, oh, you had the side character, Billy Joe. Excellent character. At least to me, almost all of these characters are extremely forgettable, unfortunately. The vampires is memorable, and I think the main character is memorable, and maybe one other, but that's kind of it. So I feel conflicted about this one. I wanted to like it more, but I feel like the lack of character development, the lack of real horror for me. There were a few scenes, but I just don't think it was very. It's not how I picture horror. This is very much, for the most part, like almost PG-13 horror. Like there are parts where it gets fairly dark, but a lot of it I don't know. I wasn't moved by it, if that makes sense. So that didn't really work for me, and I just felt like it focused too much on the maybe banality or just dullness of being a housewife for my taste. I think there's good commentary there, but I just think it's too much the focus of the novel, and I feel like there was a lot of topics that Grady Hendrix was obviously trying to get at, and I think if you dug a little bit deeper, there would have been something interesting there, but it didn't quite work for me. So I am going to give it like a 7.2 out of 10. I do think that this novel has its fans. It will definitely be, I think, for people who don't mind that kind of focus. But for me, as a horror fan, as a vampire fan, this just was not, unfortunately, what I was looking for. But I will be reading some more Grady Hendrix, because I did like his writing, and it was very interesting. So, 7.3 out of 10 for me.